The first thing I saw wasn't the kiss itself. It was the way his hand rested on the small of her back, so familiar, so proprietary, like it belonged there. I was standing across the street from his gleaming office building in Midtown. The paper bag from that little Italian place he loves getting heavy in my hand. It was supposed to be a surprise, a little bright spot in a busy Tuesday. And then I saw them, Mark, my husband, and Sarah, his work wife, the one he'd always told me was like a pesky, harmless little sister. He leaned in and she tilted her head up. It wasn't a frantic stolen moment. It was slow, deliberate, like they'd done it 100 times before. My heart didn't break. Not in that cinematic, shattering way, it just stopped. Everything went quiet, except for the rushing sound in my own ears. The yellow cabs blurred into a single streak of color. The city noise faded into a dull hum. Just that morning, I'd woken up in our sun-drenched Manhattan apartment. The one I'd put the down payment on with my partnership bonus. I looked at our life, the curated art on the walls, the view of the skyline, the comfortable silence of two people who just fit. I was a partner at a top law firm. I was a wife. I thought, unshakably happy. But that single image, his hand on her back, his lips on hers, was a wrecking ball. He pulled away, said something that made her laugh, and they walked back into the building, leaving me frozen on the sidewalk. I felt the warmth of the pasta containers turning cold against my skin. The surprise was all mine. That moment was the first thread I pulled. I had no idea that pulling it would unravel not just my marriage, but my entire reality. What I was about to uncover was so much darker than an affair. It was a calculated, devastating plan to leave me with nothing. This story isn't easy to tell, and it's taken me a long time to be able to speak it out loud. It's the kind of story you whisper to your closest friend in the dead of night. So, if you're going to stick around for the whole ugly truth, make sure you follow my story here. Honestly, I think I'm going to need the company. I didn't go back to the office. I couldn't. I walked home in a daze, the city lights smearing together like wet paint. I remember dropping the bag of no-cold pasta into the trash can in our lobby, the soft thud feeling unnervingly final. Our apartment, which had always felt like a warm embrace, was suddenly just a collection of expensive objects in a silent room. I sat on our designer sofa, the one we'd spent weeks picking out, and I just waited. I waited for the key in the lock, for the sound of his voice, for the lie I knew was coming. He walked in around 8, a bouquet of my favorite peonies in one hand and a smile so wide it looked painful. "You won't believe the day I've had," he announced, his voice booming with fake enthusiasm. He told me he'd spent the afternoon in a marathon negotiation, finally closing the massive Henderson account. "We're celebrating, live," he said, pulling me into a hug. I stiffened. His jacket smelled of his usual cologne, but underneath it, faint and sweet, was a trace of a perfume I didn't recognize. Her perfume, I forced a smile, my face feeling like a porcelain mask that could crack at any second. "That's incredible news, Mark," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. We played our parts all evening. I asked about the deal. He spun a detailed, elaborate story. He opened a bottle of champagne, the good stuff we were saving. Every sip I took felt like I was swallowing poison. He was so convincing, so charmingly confident, that for a split second, I almost doubted what I'd seen with my own eyes. Had I imagined it? Was I going crazy? That's the insidious nature of gaslighting. It makes you question your own sanity before you ever question their integrity. He talked about our future, about a vacation home in the Hamptons. He was painting a beautiful picture, and all I could see was the rot underneath the canvas. Later, when the sound of his steady breathing filled the bedroom, I slipped out of bed. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I felt like a burglar in my own home. I went to the closet where he'd hung the suit jacket he'd been wearing. My hands were trembling, but my mind was eerily calm. I wasn't looking for a lipstick stain or a phone number. I didn't even know what I was looking for. I just knew I had to look. My fingers brushed against a piece of paper in the inside pocket. It was a receipt. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't from a restaurant or a bar where he would have taken a client to celebrate. It was from Cartier. Dated that afternoon, timestamped just an hour after I'd seen him. There, in crisp black ink, was a charge for a love bracelet. The kind of thing you don't buy for a pesky little sister. The kind of thing he hadn't bought for me in years. Standing there in the dark, with the thin, cold paper in my hand, I understood. The kiss wasn't a spontaneous mistake. The lie wasn't just a simple cover-up. This was something else entirely. It was premeditated. And the sick feeling in my stomach told me that a ridiculously expensive bracelet was just the beginning. The grief from that afternoon was already hardening into something else. It was the first time I realized this wasn't just about a broken heart. It was about a calculated deception. And that little piece of paper was my first piece of proof. The fog of shock finally lifted, replaced by a single, chilling thought. What else don't I know? The Cartier receipt was a turning point. It was no longer just a feeling, a gut-wrenching suspicion born from a stolen kiss. It was a fact, a data point. And as a lawyer, I knew what to do with data. You don't cry over it, you build a case with it. The next morning, I woke up before him. I showered and dressed with a mechanical precision, my movements crisp and deliberate. When I walked into the kitchen, he was already there, smiling over a cup of coffee. He said something like, "Morning, beautiful. Still celebrating our win?" And I felt a fresh wave of nausea. I just smiled back, a tight, thin-lipped smile that didn't reach my eyes, and said, "Absolutely. You deserve it." The air between us was thick with my unspoken knowledge. It felt like I was living in a spy movie, except the betrayal was gut-wrenchingly real. I went to my office, closed the door, and for the first time in my career, I didn't open a single case file. I just stared at my computer screen. My hands hovered over the keyboard. I couldn't just start Googling how to catch a cheating husband. It felt cheap, desperate. More importantly, it was sloppy. I needed a professional. I needed someone who could move through the world unseen, who could find the truth without leaving a trace. My fingers trembled as I typed a text to my best friend, Chloe. We've been friends since law school. She's the kind of friend who would help you bury a body, no questions asked. All I wrote was, "I need to talk. Somewhere private. It's about Mark." Her reply came back in seconds. My office. 1 hour. Sitting across from her in her sleek, minimalist office, the words just tumbled out of me. The kiss, the perfume, the peonies, the Cartier receipt. I laid it all out like exhibits in a trial. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, her expression hardening from concern to a cold fury on my behalf. When I finished, she didn't offer empty reassurances. She slid a business card across her desk. "David Chen," she said. "He's discreet. The best. He helped me with a corporate espionage case last year. Finds things people think are buried for good." Calling him was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It made it real. It was admitting that the foundations of my life were a lie. I met David in a small, anonymous coffee shop downtown. He was unassuming, the kind of person you'd never look at twice. He listened patiently, his eyes missing nothing. I gave him everything I had: the receipt, Sarah's full name, Mark's schedule. I felt a strange mix of shame and empowerment as I transferred his retainer fee. I was paying someone to excavate the ruins of my own marriage. 3 days later, an encrypted email landed in my inbox. The subject line was simply, "Update." My heart hammered against my ribs as I clicked it open. There were no pleasantries, just a string of attachments. The first one I opened was a PDF, a lease agreement. My breath hitched. It was for a 1-bedroom apartment on the Upper East Side, one of those new, ridiculously luxurious glass towers. The monthly rent was more than most people's mortgages. The tenant's name was listed as Sarah Miller. But the financially responsible party, the one who had co-signed and guaranteed every single payment with a direct link to a bank account, was Mark, my husband. I scrolled down, my blood turning to ice. The account he'd linked wasn't his personal salary account. It was our joint investment fund, the one we'd been building for our future. He wasn't just buying her jewelry. He was building her a life. A whole, secret, beautifully furnished life, just a few miles away from me. And he was using my money, our money, to do it. I stared at the screen, at the black and white letters of his name next to hers, and for the first time, I understood. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a conspiracy. And I had been sleeping next to the enemy. The lease agreement felt like a physical object lodged in my throat. I couldn't swallow. I couldn't breathe. I must have read it a dozen times, my eyes tracing the digital letters of Mark's name. His signature so familiar, so fraudulent over and over again. This wasn't a fling. A fling is cheap motel rooms and whispered phone calls. This was an entire parallel life, built with the bricks and mortar of our shared future. Every late night at the office, every business trip now replayed in my mind, colored with this sickening new reality. I felt a profound, bottomless foolishness. I, Olivia Serrano, a partner at a firm that specialized in dissecting lies, had been living inside the biggest lie of all. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in our bed, the space between me and Mark feeling like a canyon. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, and it repulsed me. I listened to his steady, even breathing, the sound of a man at peace, and I imagined him dreaming of her, in the apartment I was paying for. The rage was a physical thing, a hot coil in my stomach, but I knew I couldn't act on it. Not yet. A screaming match would only give him the chance to lie, to manipulate, to turn it all back on me. "You're being hysterical, live. It's a misunderstanding." I could almost hear the words, "no." My anger had to be cold. It had to be a weapon, not a release. The next day, I emailed David. My instructions were simple and surgical. I need everything. Full financial forensics. Every account, every credit card, every transaction linked to his name for the past 2 years. I transferred him a second, much larger fee without a moment's hesitation. It felt like I was funding a war. My own secret war. The week that followed was the longest of my life. I moved through my days like an automaton. I went to work. I led meetings. I advised clients on their own messy divorces and contract disputes. The irony so thick it was almost suffocating. At home, I played the part of the devoted wife. I'd ask Mark about his day, and he would spin his tales of corporate battles and demanding clients. All while I knew he was texting her, probably planning their next weekend in our apartment. I'd smile and nod and feel a piece of my soul shrivel up and die. One evening, he came home complaining about a dip in our investment portfolio, blaming it on market volatility. He had the nerve to look me in the eye and say, "Don't worry, honey. I'm on top of it. Our future is safe with me." The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. Then, the email came. A week to the day after my request. The subject was dossier. It was a single, password-protected zip file. I locked my office door, my hands trembling so badly I could barely type the password David had given me. The file opened and a list of documents filled my screen. Financial statements, wire transfer confirmations, loan applications, incorporation papers. It was a mountain of data. I started at the top. The first folder was labeled Inheritance Account. My heart seized. It was the account my parents had left me, a safety net I rarely touched, a sacred piece of their legacy. I clicked it open. I saw a series of large, systematic withdrawals over the last 18 months. 50,000 here, 75,000 there. The total was staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, just gone. But it was the next folder that shattered me. Labeled Startup Funding. I opened a PDF and my world tilted on its axis. It was an application for a business loan for a tech startup called Elysian Innovations. Founder and CEO, Sarah Miller. The loan amount was for $250,000. And to secure it, the applicant had put up collateral. Our apartment, my home. And there, at the bottom of the page, was my signature, authorizing the use of our primary residence as security for her dream. It wasn't my signature. I had never seen this document before in my life. It was a forgery. A meticulous, flawless forgery. He hadn't just stolen from me. He had used my name, my identity, to indebt me, to risk the very roof over my head. The plan was suddenly, horrifically clear. This wasn't just about funding his mistress's new life. This was a systematic extraction. He was draining my inheritance, leveraging our shared assets, and pouring it all into her company. The endgame was obvious. Once the startup was stable and the money was gone, they would disappear together, leaving me in the wreckage, buried under a mountain of debt he had created in my name. I leaned back in my chair, the cold leather pressing against my skin. The air left my lungs in a single, silent gasp. The pain was so sharp, so absolute, it was almost clarifying. There were no more tears left to cry. The grief I'd felt a week ago seemed like a distant, naive emotion. This wasn't a betrayal of love. This was a meticulously planned execution of my life. He hadn't just broken my heart, he had tried to erase me. And in that moment, sitting in the quiet of my office with the evidence of his breathtaking cruelty glowing on the screen, the woman who cried on the sidewalk was gone forever. The sadness was burned away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve that settled deep in my bones. He was about to find out what happens when you try to destroy a woman who builds things for a living. He had started a war. I was going to end it. The dossier became my secret Bible. I spent hours memorizing every transfer, every forged signature, every lie immortalized in black and white. The grief was gone, replaced by a glacial calm. An architect designing a demolition doesn't weep. They study the load-bearing walls. And I could see the structural weaknesses in their plan, their arrogance, their greed, and, most of all, their complete underestimation of me. I decided then that I wouldn't just survive this. I would control the narrative. I would become the perfect, unsuspecting wife. I would wear my smile like armor and my love like a weapon, and I would let them walk right into the trap I was about to set. The performance began that Friday. I came home from work and found Mark in the kitchen, a strange, almost nervous energy about him. He told me he had an idea. He said his team had been working so hard, and that Sarah, in particular, was really burning out. He had the absolute, stomach-turning audacity to suggest we have her over for dinner. Just a casual thing, he'd said, not quite meeting my eyes. She could use a home-cooked meal. It would be a nice gesture. I felt a cold, sharp blade of rage press against my insides, but my face arranged itself into a mask of warm understanding. I even placed my hand on his arm, a gesture of wifely support. "Mark, that's so thoughtful of you," I heard myself say. "Of course, what's mine is yours." The look of relief that washed over his face was almost comical. He thought I was just being nice. He had no idea I was declaring war. Hosting my husband's mistress in the home she was trying to steal was the most surreal experience of my life. She arrived with a ridiculously expensive bottle of wine, gushing about our apartment, her eyes scanning every painting, every piece of furniture, with a disturbing sense of ownership. She was everything I wasn't, bubbly, overtly charming, with a calculated helplessness that I could see was designed to make men like Mark feel powerful. We sat at my dining table, the one I inherited from my grandmother, and I served them the risotto that used to be Mark's favorite. I played my part to perfection. I was gracious. I was complimentary. I asked about her startup, my voice full of faux admiration, It just sounds so brilliant. Sarah, I said, refilling her wine glass. Mark has told me so much about your vision. Mark beamed, soaking in the sight of his two women getting along. He probably thought he was the smartest man in the world. He started boasting about their initial success, the positive feedback from early testers, the buzz they were generating. They were comfortable, they were confident. And then they got careless. Fueled by her second glass of wine and my endless encouragement, Sarah started to open up. I leaned forward, my expression a perfect picture of innocent curiosity. So, what's the next big milestone? I asked. After the launch, what's phase 2? Sarah glanced at Mark, a quick, conspiratorial little smile passing between them. He gave a slight nod, as if giving her permission. She turned back to me, her eyes gleaming with ambition. She started talking about scaling up, expanding their team, and then she said it. The phrase that changed everything. She told me their biggest hurdle was securing the next round of funding, but that they had a solid plan to fully liquidate the primary asset in the second quarter to finance the global push. The air in the room went still for a fraction of a second. I saw a flicker of sheer panic in Mark's eyes. The primary asset, I knew exactly what she meant. This apartment, my apartment. It wasn't just collateral anymore. Their plan was to force a sale, to turn my home into cash and run. Mark jumped in immediately, his voice a little too loud, a little too jovial. He explained that it was just industry jargon, that she was talking about converting initial investor shares. He was trying to cover her mistake, trying to smooth over the technical term he assumed I wouldn't understand. He patted my hand and said, "Don't you worry your pretty head about it, Liv. It's boring business stuff." I just smiled. A slow, genuine smile this time. I looked at him, at this man who thought I was an idiot, a pretty head with nothing inside it. I looked at her, so drunk on her own supposed success. They thought they were leagues ahead of me, mapping out a future in a foreign country with my money. But in her drunken arrogance, she hadn't just made a slip of the tongue. She had given me their timeline. She had confirmed their endgame. He thought he was covering up a simple mistake. He had no idea he'd just handed me the blueprint for his own destruction. The game of masks was over. It was time to build my counterattack. The phrase, liquidate the primary asset, echoed in my mind for days. It was so cold, so clinical. They weren't talking about a home. They were talking about a line item on a balance sheet. And Mark's condescending little pat on my hand, his "don't you worry your pretty head about it," was the gasoline on the fire. For years, my pretty head had built a career that eclipsed his, had earned the bonus that bought the very asset they were planning to liquidate. The insult was so profound, so deeply rooted in his own insecurity, that it gave me a new kind of clarity. This wasn't just about greed. This was personal. I emailed David that night. My request was different this time. I wasn't looking for more financial records, I was looking for motive. Forget the money for a minute, I wrote. I need to know why. Dig into Sarah Miller's past. Is she a career grifter? And more importantly, I need a deep dive on Mark's professional life. I want to know about his performance at the firm. I want to know his reputation. I need to understand what's driving him. I needed to know the nature of the beast I was fighting. Was he a cornered animal, or a predator who had been stalking me all along? While I waited, I found myself drifting through our apartment like a ghost. One evening, I opened a photo album I hadn't looked at in years. There we were on our honeymoon in Italy, impossibly young and smiling. I remembered that trip, how he'd carried my suitcase up 100 steps in Positano without complaining, how he'd told everyone we met. With so much pride in his voice that I had just made junior partner. He used to champion my success. He'd listen for hours as I rehearsed my arguments for a big case, telling me I was the smartest person he'd ever met. Where did that man go? Looking at the photo, I felt a pang of real, agonizing grief for the man I had loved, for the marriage I thought we had. That was the central wound, I realized. It wasn't just the loss of the money or the home. It was the poisoning of the past. He was trying to steal the one thing I had built entirely on my own, my professional identity, the very thing he once claimed to admire most. My own quiet investigation began. I started listening, really listening, when he talked about work. I noticed he'd stopped mentioning his big clients. His stories were vague, full of corporate jargon but light on actual details of success. He talked more about office politics, about incompetent bosses and jealous colleagues who were out to get him. He was painting a picture of a man besieged, a victim of a system that didn't appreciate his genius. It was a classic narcissist's lament. 5 days later, David's email arrived. The subject line read, "Motivation." I opened it, my stomach in knots. The first part was about Sarah. As I suspected, she had a history. 2 previous relationships with wealthy, older men that had ended with her receiving significant gifts. She wasn't a mastermind. She was a parasite, and she had found her perfect host. But the second part of the file was the one that stopped my breath. It was a summary of Mark's professional performance review from 6 months prior. His numbers were in the gutter. He'd lost 2 major accounts through what was described as reckless and highly leveraged trades. He was officially on probation. He wasn't the master of the universe he pretended to be. He was a failure, teetering on the edge of professional ruin. But the real gut punch was buried in an attached email chain between Mark and his managing partner, a man I'd met several times at holiday parties. The partner was excoriating Mark for a particularly bad loss. He was angry, his words sharp and condescending. And then I saw the line that made all the pieces of the puzzle click into place. The partner had written, "Frankly, Mark, I'm stunned by your lack of discipline. Your wife is one of the sharpest legal minds in this city. You should take a page out of her book on risk management. Why can't you be more like Olivia?" I felt the air rush out of my lungs. I dropped my head into my hands, the screen blurring in front of my eyes. This whole elaborate, cruel scheme wasn't for Sarah. Not really. It was for him. It was his twisted way of getting back at me for his own failures. Every dollar he stole, every lie he told, was a desperate attempt to build himself up by tearing me down. He couldn't stand being married to a woman who was more successful than he was, so he decided to burn her kingdom to the ground. He wasn't just trying to run away with my money. He was trying to win a game I never even knew we were playing. Knowing why changed the entire equation. The rage I felt was no longer a hot, chaotic storm. It was a block of ice, precise, unmeltable. His motive wasn't a crime of passion. It was a crime of ego. He wasn't trying to build a new life with her. He was trying to demolish mine to make the rubble of his own feel like a castle. And that knowledge gave me a terrifying sense of power. I could finally see the whole board. I knew what pieces he valued most. Not just the money, but his reputation. The fragile illusion of success he projected to the world. A simple divorce and a lawsuit felt insufficient. I didn't want to just win. I wanted to dismantle his reality piece by piece, starting with the very professional world he so desperately wanted to conquer. I had the evidence. David had provided a mountain of it, but evidence is only as powerful as the arena you present it in. I could take it to the police, and I would, eventually. But that was a blunt instrument. It wouldn't get my money back quickly, and it wouldn't touch the core of his betrayal, the professional humiliation he'd used as fuel. I needed an ally. Someone with the power to detonate a bomb inside Mark's life before he even knew what was happening. The answer was right there, in the dossier. Arthur Vance, Mark's managing partner, the man whose cutting email had laid Mark's pathetic motive bare. I remembered Arthur from Holiday Parties, a shark in a bespoke suit, with cold, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He was a man who prized two things above all else: his firm's reputation and its bottom line. Mark's fraud, I realized, threatened both. Getting a meeting with him was a risk. I couldn't go through official channels. Mark would be alerted instantly. I found Arthur's private email through a legal directory and sent a message that was both vague and urgent. The subject line was a matter of urgent and confidential risk management. I identified myself only as Olivia Serrano and stated that I had irrefutable proof of a significant financial liability involving one of his senior employees. I gave him nothing more. The bait was set. He responded in under an hour. My office. Tomorrow, 7 a.m., I walked into the towering glass and steel monolith of his investment firm the next morning, feeling like I was walking into the lion's den. This was his territory. I was ushered into a cavernous corner office with a panoramic view of the city. Arthur didn't offer me coffee. He just gestured to a leather chair and said, "You have my attention." I didn't start with the affair. I didn't start with my broken heart. I started with the language he understood. Risk. I laid out a single unmarked file on his enormous mahogany desk. 2 weeks ago, I began, my voice even and steady. I discovered that one of your employees, Mark Serrano, has been systematically embezzling from a private trust. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I then walked him through it, not as a wife, but as a fellow professional presenting a case. I showed him the wire transfers from my inheritance account. Then I showed him the incorporation documents for Elysian Innovations with Sarah Miller as CEO. I pointed out her employment at his firm, establishing a clear internal link. Finally, I slid the forged loan application across the desk. He used a forged signature to leverage my primary residence or shared apartment as collateral for a business loan for Ms. Miller's company. I tapped my finger on the document. This is bank fraud. And it was perpetrated by a senior member of your team, using knowledge and connections he has because of his position here. Should this become public, and it will, the reputational damage to your firm would be catastrophic. Arthur was silent. He picked up the loan document, his eyes scanning it, lingering on my forged signature. I saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. I didn't need to see rage. This was better. This was the cold, hard calculation of a man seeing a multi-million-dollar liability. He looked up at me, his eyes like chips of granite. He told me, his voice dangerously low, that he appreciated me bringing this to him directly. He asked what I wanted. "I want him stripped of everything," I said, the words coming out colder than I intended. "His assets, his career, his reputation. I've already engaged my own legal team to handle the criminal proceedings and the divorce. What I need from you is to handle the corporate implosion. I want you to help me ensure that when this story breaks, he has absolutely nothing and nowhere to run." A slow, almost imperceptible nod. He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city below. He told me he would be launching an immediate internal investigation. He advised me not to file a police report just yet. He explained that a quiet internal decapitation was cleaner, more efficient. He would suspend Mark's trading privileges, freeze his company accounts, and schedule an emergency board meeting. He told me to wait for his signal. He would provide the arena. I just had to be ready to swing the sword. I walked out of that building and back into the morning sunlight. My heart no longer a frantic drum but a steady, powerful beat. I had done it. I had secured the most powerful ally imaginable. Mark thought he was playing a secret game against his unsuspecting wife. He had no idea he was now playing against the man who held his entire career in the palm of his hand. And the house was about to fold. The days following my meeting with Arthur were a unique form of psychological torture. I was living inside a pressure cooker, waiting for a signal that the heat was about to be turned all the way up. At home, I walked on a tightrope of feigned normalcy. Mark was more confident than ever, buoyed by the belief that he was about to pull off the ultimate deception. He'd come home from work, kiss my cheek with lips that had kissed her hours before, and talk about his stressful days at the office. He'd tell me he was working so hard for us, for our future. The performance was so seamless, so utterly lacking in conscience, that it was almost mesmerizing. I would nod and smile, asking the right questions, playing the role of the supportive, slightly clueless wife, while my mind was a whirlwind of legal statutes, bank statements, and a cold, simmering fury. I slept in our bed, a few feet of empty space between us that felt like a frozen river. I'd lie awake in the dark, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, the sound of the man who had plotted my ruin sleeping peacefully. The silence of the apartment was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It was filled with the ghosts of our past and the promises of his future treachery. There were moments when the rage was so potent, so visceral, that I had to physically grip the sheets to keep from screaming. But I held it in. I packed it down, compressing it into something hard and sharp, a diamond of pure resolve. My pain wasn't for public consumption. It was fuel. While Arthur was laying the groundwork inside his firm, I gave David his final and most important assignment. I didn't just want to ruin Mark. I wanted to do it on a stage of his own making. I wanted to turn his greatest triumph into his most public humiliation. My email to David was precise. Monitor all communications and scheduling related to Elysian Innovations. I need to know the exact moment they are set to receive their major funding. I want to know who the investors are, where the meeting will take place, and when. I want to be in the room when it happens. The waiting gnawed at me. Every ping of my phone made my heart leap into my throat. I was an actress in a long-running play, and I was desperate for the final act to begin. Mark, meanwhile, was getting sloppy. He'd leave his laptop open, so sure of my ignorance. One evening, while he was in the shower, I saw an email pop up on his screen. A calendar invite from Sarah. The subject was the big day. The location was a conference room at a prestigious venture capital firm, Sterling Thorne. The date was set for the following Tuesday. A few hours later, David's official report landed in my inbox, confirming everything. It was the final pitch meeting. They were meeting with a consortium of angel investors, the ones who'd give them the capital to trigger the next phase of their plan, the liquidation of my home. The report included a short bio on each investor. These weren't just rich individuals. They were titans of the tech and finance world. For Sarah, this meeting was the culmination of her dream. For Mark, it was his ticket out, his proof that he could succeed, that he was smarter than everyone, especially me. They had built this moment on my money and my trust. It was the perfect stage, but I couldn't just storm in. That would be chaotic, emotional. It would make me look like a scorned wife, and they could dismiss it as a domestic dispute. No, I had to be more clever than that. My entrance had to be as calculated as their entire scheme. I sat at my desk, the city lights twinkling below, and the plan unfurled in my mind, elegant and brutal in its simplicity. I wouldn't be an intruder. I would be an honored guest. The next morning, I called Arthur. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I have the time and place, I said, my voice low and steady. I told him about the investor meeting at Sterling Thorne. I don't want to crash it, Arthur. I want to be invited. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his powerful mind. What do you have in mind, Olivia? He asked, a new note of respect in his voice. I want you to make a call, I explained, the plan feeling more real as I spoke it aloud. You know these people. I want you to tell them a major anonymous benefactor has expressed last-minute interest in Elysian Innovations. Someone who wants to hear the pitch in person before making a significant commitment. I'll be your ghost investor. I want them to welcome me in, to smile at me, to pitch their fraudulent dream to my face. Another silence, longer this time. Then, a low chuckle. He told me it was the most ruthless, brilliant corporate takedown he'd ever heard of. He said he would not only make the call, he would personally vouch for me, positioning me as a highly sought-after, elusive investor he was personally advising. He would make my presence in that room an event, a coup for them. They wouldn't just let me in. They would be falling all over themselves to impress me. He called me back that afternoon. "It's done," he said. "They've rearranged the schedule to accommodate you. They think you're their golden goose." After I hung up, I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window in my office, looking down at the city that was supposed to be our kingdom. He had tried to take it from me, to reduce me to a casualty in the story of his own pathetic comeback. He thought next Tuesday was his coronation. He had no idea he had just RSVP'd to his own execution. The curtain was about to rise, and I was finally ready for my scene. The weekend before the meeting was the calm before the hurricane. On the surface, everything was perfect. We went to the farmer's market on Saturday morning, a ritual of ours. He bought me flowers, the same way he always did, his hand resting on my back as we walked through the crowds. The gesture that once meant comfort now felt like a brand, a claim of ownership he no longer had the right to. I smiled and played along, my mind a million miles away, rehearsing my opening lines, visualizing the look on his face when he finally understood. We had brunch with friends on Sunday, and I listened as he told them about the incredible new venture he was advising on, painting himself as the silent genius behind Sarah's success. He was so polished, so believable. I watched her friends hang on his every word, and I felt a profound sense of isolation. I was living in a world of ghosts and shadows, the only one who could see the truth. Monday was a blur of preparation. I didn't go into the office. I told Mark I was taking a personal day, and he barely registered it. Too consumed by his own impending triumph, my apartment became a war room. I spread David's entire dossier across my dining room table. I didn't need to review the facts, they were seared into my memory. This was about strategy. I arranged the documents not in chronological order, but in order of emotional impact. The forged loan application would be my opening salvo. The systematic draining of my inheritance would be the brutal follow-up. The evidence of his professional probation, his deep-seated failure, that would be the killing blow. I was choreographing a symphony of destruction. That evening, as I was packing the documents into a sleek, anonymous leather portfolio, I overheard him in the other room. He was on the phone, his voice a low, tense murmur. He must have thought I was out. I pressed my ear to the door, my heart a slow, heavy drum. It was Sarah. But this wasn't the sweet, conspiratorial tone I had heard before. Her voice was sharp, demanding. I couldn't make out all the words, but I caught phrases. Double quotes. ... Not what we agreed. Mark, ... double quotes, and ... my name on the line, ... double quotes, followed by his strained, placating response. It's just a temporary measure. Sarah, you have to trust me. There was a long pause, and then I heard him say, his voice laced with a desperation I'd never heard before, "Don't get greedy now. We are too close. Just stick to the plan." I backed away from the door, a cold smile touching my lips. A crack in the facade, of course. A partnership built on deceit has no foundation. He was manipulating her, too, probably skimming money or altering their agreement behind her back. She was getting nervous, and he was losing control. Their perfect alliance was already starting to fray under the pressure of their own greed. It was a small thing, a brief, whispered argument, but it was everything. It confirmed they weren't a united front. They were two selfish people tied together by a criminal conspiracy, and when it fell apart, they would turn on each other in a heartbeat. The knowledge settled in my chest, a calm, reassuring weight. They were already losing. They just didn't know it yet. After he hung up, he came into the living room where I was pretending to read a book. He was trying to look relaxed, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the faint sheen of sweat on his brow. He sat down beside me and took my hand. "You know, Liv," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Everything I do, it's to build a life worthy of you." It was the most obscene thing he had ever said to me. I just looked at him, my expression unreadable, and replied, "I know, Mark. You're a good man. Tonight, the night before, there is no fear. There is only a profound and unsettling stillness. I'm standing in front of my closet, not deciding what to wear, but choosing my armor. I select a charcoal gray sheath dress, sharp and severe. No jewelry except my wedding ring a final. Ironic nod to the vows he shattered. I've laid it all out, ready for the morning. The dress, the shoes, the portfolio filled with his ruin. I feel like a soldier on the eve of a battle I know I am going to win. This isn't just about the money anymore. It's not even just about the betrayal. It's about reclaiming my name, the one he forged. It's about taking back the story, a story he tried to rewrite with me as the victim. Tomorrow, I walk into that room not as Olivia Serrano, the broken-hearted wife. I walk in as the anonymous benefactor, the ghost investor, the final, unexpected variable in their neat little equation. Tomorrow, they will pitch their dreams to me, and I will show them their nightmare. I arrived at the Sterling Thorne offices at 10 o'clock sharp. The air in the lobby was refrigerated, smelling of money and expensive cleaning products. It was designed to be intimidating, a temple built to the gods of capital. But I felt no intimidation. I felt a strange crystalline calm, like the eye of a hurricane. I gave my name at the front desk, and the receptionist's eyes widened slightly. Of course, Miss Serrano, we've been expecting you. She spoke my name with a reverence that was almost comical. To her, I was the mysterious benefactor, the whale they were hoping to land. She personally escorted me to a private elevator. When the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, a junior associate was already waiting for me. He led me down a long, silent hallway carpeted in a thick gray wool that absorbed all sound. He stopped in front of a heavy, frosted glass door. "They're just getting started," he whispered, as if we were about to enter a sacred space. "They're all very excited to have you." I gave him a small, tight smile. "I'm sure they are," I said. He opened the door, and for a moment, the world moved in slow motion. The room was dominated by a massive, dark wood conference table that reflected the city skyline like a black mirror. Seated around it were 5 men in expensive suits. The investors, at the head of the table, standing in front of a large screen, was Sarah. She was glowing, radiant in a crisp, white dress. The picture of a visionary CEO, and standing just to her side, his hand resting proprietarily on the back of her chair, was Mark, my husband. He saw me first. His confident smile faltered for a microsecond, a tiny glitch in the matrix of his perfect presentation. I saw the confusion in his eyes, a flicker of something primal and fearful, before he masked it with a veneer of professional charm. He had no context for my presence. He couldn't possibly know. Sarah just saw a well-dressed woman, her potential savior, and her smile widened. The junior associate introduced me. "Everyone, this is our guest," representing the benefactor Mr. Vance spoke of. The investors all turned, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and deference. Mark's face was a pale, frozen mask. He looked at me, then at the investors, then back at me, the gears in his mind grinding, trying to solve an impossible puzzle. I simply gave a serene nod to the room and took the empty seat that had been reserved for me, directly opposite them. "Please, don't let me interrupt," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "I'm eager to hear all about Elysian Innovations." For the next 45 minutes, I listened to them sell my life back to me, packaged in PowerPoint slides and corporate jargon. Sarah was a polished performer, hitting all the right notes: disruption, innovation, scalability. She talked about their vision for a global push, their 5-year plan for market dominance. And then Mark would step in to talk about the financials. He spoke with a deep, authoritative confidence, throwing around terms like aggressive leveraging and maximized asset utilization. He was talking about my inheritance, my home. He pointed to a chart showing their seed funding, a neat, clean bar of blue representing the hundreds of thousands of dollars he had stolen from me. He was so proud, so utterly, damnably proud. I didn't move. I didn't take notes. I just watched him, my hands folded calmly on the table in front of me. My stillness began to unnerve them. I could see Mark's confidence starting to fray at the edges. He started stumbling over his words, his eyes darting towards me, trying to get a read. Sarah, sensing the shift in the room, wrapped up the presentation quickly. When they were finished, the lead investor, a silver-haired man named Harrison, turned to me. "Well," he said with a broad smile, "quite the impressive venture. What are your initial thoughts?" This was it. The moment the entire world pivoted, I let the silence hang in the air for a beat too long. Then I leaned forward slightly. "It is impressive," I agreed, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Ambitious, bold. I have just one area I'd like to explore further, for my own due diligence." I reached down and opened my leather portfolio. I didn't look at Mark, but I could feel his gaze on me, hot and panicked. I was particularly interested in the initial loan that served as the foundation for your seed funding, the one secured by the primary asset. I slid the first document across the polished surface of the table. It was the loan application. It stopped right in front of Harrison. "I'd like to draw your attention to the signature of the cosigner authorizing the collateral." Mark made a small, choking sound. Sarah's face was a canvas of confusion. Harrison picked up the paper. I continued, my voice never wavering. "That signature belongs to me. Except, I never signed it. It's a forgery." The air was sucked out of the room. The investor stared at the document, then at me, then at Mark, whose face had gone from pale to a ghastly, waxy white. Before anyone could speak, I laid out the next exhibit. That loan was a necessity, of course, because the initial operating capital for Elysian Innovations came from a series of unauthorized wire transfers. I slid the bank statements from my inheritance account onto the table, all from a private trust fund. My trust fund. One by one, I laid the truth bare. Each document was a nail in their coffin. I presented the lease agreement for Sarah's luxury apartment, paid for from our joint investment account. I presented the credit card statements filled with charges for jewelry and designer bags, disguised as client dinners. I saved my trump card for last. Now, I understand that in any venture, you're not just investing in an idea, you're investing in the people, I said, my eyes finally locking with Mark's. The hatred and terror in his gaze was so pure it was almost beautiful. "You might assume that Mr. Serrano, your financial architect, is a sound investment. A rock." I slid the final file across the table. It was the performance review from Arthur Vance. According to his managing partner, however, Mr. Serrano is currently on professional probation for losing 2 major accounts due to reckless behavior. He is, and I quote, a significant and unacceptable liability. The investors were now staring at Mark with open disgust. Sarah looked like she was about to be physically ill. Her dream was imploding right in front of her. I stood up, my chair making no sound on the thick carpet. I looked around the table at the shocked faces of the powerful men, and then I looked at the 2 people who had tried to erase me. You see, gentlemen, I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that felt like it could shatter glass, the story of Elysian Innovations is a brilliant one. But it's a work of fiction. A fiction built with forged documents and stolen money. I let my gaze settle on Mark one last time. He looked like a hollowed-out man, a ghost at his own funeral. My name is Olivia Serrano. The primary asset you were planning to liquidate is my home. The inheritance you were planning to spend is my family's legacy. And the man you've been listening to, I said, my voice dropping to an icy whisper, is my husband. I turned and walked towards the door, my heels clicking softly on the floor. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The silence I left behind was more damning than any scream, more explosive than any argument. It was the sound of a world ending. I pulled the heavy door closed behind me, leaving them all in the ruins. I didn't wait for the elevator. I walked down 37 flights of stairs. The sharp, repetitive motion, a welcome shock to my system. Each step felt like I was walking away from a version of myself I no longer recognized. The trusting wife, the unsuspecting partner, the victim. By the time I hit the cold marble of the lobby and pushed through the revolving doors into the bright, chaotic symphony of a Manhattan afternoon, I wasn't that woman anymore. I didn't feel triumphant, not yet. I just felt quiet. The rage had burned itself out, leaving behind a clean, empty space. I walked for hours, with no destination, just letting the city swallow me up until the sun began to bleed across the Hudson. The fallout was swift and brutal. I got the first call from Arthur the next morning. His voice was clipped, professional, but I could hear the undercurrent of grim satisfaction. He told me the investors had walked out of that room in a state of controlled fury. The funding was, of course, dead on arrival, but it was much more than that. Harrison, the lead investor, was a man who prided himself on his due diligence, and Mark had made a fool of him. Arthur informed me that Mark had been suspended, pending an internal investigation that was merely a formality. Security had escorted him out of the building that same afternoon. His access was cut, his accounts frozen. He was, in a single moment, erased from the world he had so desperately tried to conquer. My lawyers, armed with a dossier and a signed affidavit from Arthur's firm, moved in for the kill. The criminal charges came first: bank fraud, wire fraud, aggravated identity theft. The sheer weight of the evidence was overwhelming. There would be no trial, no dramatic courtroom showdown. Just a quiet, pathetic surrender. He took a plea deal. The last I heard, he was facing years in a federal prison. His name now synonymous with a particularly stupid and arrogant kind of white-collar crime. He had tried to burn down my kingdom, and he had only succeeded in building his own cage. And Sarah? She vanished. Like smoke. Once the money dried up and the threat of legal action became real, she disappeared. David's final report to me was a single line. Subject has vacated the apartment and left no forwarding. Address, I imagined her packing her designer bags, the ones bought with my money, and running. A parasite in search of a new host. I felt nothing for her. Not hatred, not even pity. She was a footnote in the story of my husband's ego. He would have found another Sarah. The betrayal wasn't about her. It was always about him. The divorce was a simple administrative affair. With the fraud convictions, he had no standing, no leverage. He was a ghost, signing papers. I got everything. The first thing I did was put the apartment on the market. The place that had once been my sanctuary now felt like a beautifully decorated crime scene. I sold it in less a week, without a single pang of regret. Watching the movers pack away, the life Mark and I had built felt less like an ending and more like an exorcism. I was shedding a skin. I recovered every single cent he had stolen. The money from my inheritance was returned through court-ordered restitution. The joint accounts were mine. With it, I bought this place, a penthouse. It's smaller than the old apartment, but it's higher up. The view is a sprawling, breathtaking panorama of Central Park, a sea of green and gold that changes with the light. I signed the closing papers with my own name, my own hand, and the weight of the keys in my palm felt like the first real thing I had held in a year. For a while, the victory was enough. I would sit here, with a glass of wine, and watch the city lights come on, and I would feel a sense of satisfaction so pure it was almost a physical taste. I had won. I had not just survived, I had prevailed. But after a few weeks, a strange melancholy started to creep in. The anger was gone, the fight was over, but the quiet was still there. And in that quiet, I came to the final, most important realization of this whole nightmare. The real twist wasn't what he did to me. It was what I had almost done to myself. I was so focused on him, on his betrayal and his lies, that I had nearly forgotten who I was before him, and who I was meant to be after. The real healing didn't come from watching him fall. It came when I finally forgave myself. I forgave the woman who was so in love that she didn't see the red flags. I forgave her for wanting to believe in the fairy tale. She wasn't stupid or weak. She was hopeful. And he took that hope and weaponized it. My victory isn't that I destroyed him. My victory is that he didn't destroy her. The hopeful part of me, he just buried her for a little while. Today, I can look at that old photo of us in Italy and I don't feel rage. I feel a distant sadness for the young woman in the picture, and a quiet pride for the woman she was forced to become. He didn't take my success. He couldn't. It was mine. He didn't take my strength. He just showed me how much of it I had. He tried to take my future, and instead, he gave me a new one with a much better view. I'm telling this story now from my new home, my sanctuary, looking out over the park. And it makes me wonder where all of you are listening to this. It's a strange comfort, sending these words out into the world. Let me know in the comments what city you're hearing this in. Knowing this story is reaching people, that I'm not just talking to myself, it makes all the difference. If anything I've shared has resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight to reclaim your own story, make sure you subscribe. Because this chapter is over, but my new one is just beginning. And I have a feeling it's going to be a hell of a book.